And we're live. It's October 14th, 2024, 5 o'clock p.m., and this is Dog Shirt TV. My guest today is the estimable Jonathan Rauch, with whom I'm going to stare into the void, and we invite you to stare with us. But first, the monologue, which is about, of course, cultural appropriation. Now, I want to say that I am usually not fussed about cultural appropriation. I kind of like it. It's called, like borrowing things from other cultures. And, that's what makes music sound better. It makes foods taste better. And when people whine about cultural appropriation, I usually say, what do you want? Like Swedes to be Vikings and, Franks to be French to be Franks and, um, you know, uh, you know, Australia not to exist. But I have to say that this weekend's uh, demonstration of atonement, the Day of Atonement, by evangelicals on the Mall, kind of pissed me off. So, first of all, you can atone any day, evangelicals. I'm fine with that. There's fine. You want to atone for America's sins? Great, go for it. You want to bring 15,000 people or whatever, tens of thousands of people to the mall? Fine. I have no problem with that. But when you do it on Yom Kippur and you show up in taluses with shofars and it's not good for the Jews. And so that's the monologue. I want sushi. I don't have a problem with yoga, but leave Yom Kippur alone, okay? I was home not atoning. I was doing other stuff. And I know what people are going to say. They're going to say, you don't like cultural appropriation when it's your culture. Not really. I kind of like cultural appropriation. I sort of think the holiest day of the year, just leave that one alone. We're not allowed to have fun anymore unless we're doing cosplay with on the mall about the Day of Atonement and dressing up as the high priest. Then we're allowed to have fun, but we are allowed to have Jonathan Rauch, who is back and who sent me a text over the weekend saying he was in a very dark place, which I had anticipated because I called this episode without consulting him. Jonathan Rauch faces the apocalypse. And turns out he was, in fact, facing the apocalypse. And for some reason, I just guessed that. So, Jonathan, how are you feeling?
Well, a little pre-apocalyptic. This election is extremely close. That's disturbing partly because the outcome could be very, very bad for our country, but it's even more disturbing because this election should not be close. One of the candidates should have been disqualified by public acclamation years ago. So it's not just the election, it's that I feel I no longer really understand my country in the way I thought it did, and that many aspects of my country that I took for granted since early childhood either never held true and I didn't know it, or no longer hold true.
Well, here is what is not holding true for me, which is the live stream doesn't seem to be working correctly. And I don't know what that's about. So if you think you're joining us on on YouTube, you may not be. You may be. I don't know. But anyway, fuck it. So Jonathan, let's first talk about the election and figure out whether everybody's bedwetting over nothing. How do you assess it at this point?
Well, I'm not a political reporter, and so I rely on people who are, but I see no particular reason to question the view of our political colleagues that this is a jump ball election, that it probably comes down to Pennsylvania. A month ago, I thought it was pretty much leaning Harris, and I thought for example, my home state of Arizona would wind up in the Harris column. I think now it looks like Arizona's headed for Trump. It looks like there's no way for Harris to win without Pennsylvania. It looks like Pennsylvania's, anyone's game. It's a turnout election, we increasingly think, because the bases are now so frozen in place. There just aren't that many undecided voters. So we'll see. In my heart, I still expect Harris to win. That's my hunch. But at this point, I'm just whistling Dixie.
And if Harris wins, are you still depressed?
Yes.
Or are you contingently depressed?
I'm not panicked anymore. I'm not scared anymore. I'm going to make you answer all the same questions. Maybe you're in the, America's been through much worse than this camps. So maybe you'll be one of those. If Harris wins, first of all, it's going to be a close win. It's not going to be the kind of win that will make the Republican Party rethink the road that it's been on. Second, there is zero chance that Donald Trump and his MAGA movement and his party will accept a Harris win. After all, if Harris becomes president, then Donald Trump may well go to jail. So there will be, if it's a close election and she appears to be the winner, there will be a shitstorm. Everything conceivable will be thrown at the wall to deny the victory to Kamala Harris. And the MAGA forces will attempt to throw it into the House of Representatives. And there will be conspiracy theories galore. So all of that will happen. And then we'll see who's inaugurated on January 20th. However, if Trump wins fair and square, Harris will concede. And then you tell me, Ben, but then I think we're in a world that the United States has not experienced. Regions of it did, arguably, before the Civil War in the South and under Jim Crow in the South, but not at the U.S. level. Okay, so where am I wrong?
Well, you're wrong in the sense that the live stream to YouTube isn't working, and there are 8 people waiting there for your words of wisdom, and they're getting increasingly frustrated, and I think there's going to be, a violent protest as a result.
Well, we could disengage and come back on and see if it works.
No, because there are these people who were here, who I think...
people.
Yeah, there are people who are here in the chat. Yeah. And they will and by the way, they should join with any questions, whenever they wish. No, we'll post it to YouTube later. And so look,
well,
I think
technical deficiencies are part of the show, right? Isn't that what we say on Dog Shirt
Yes,
Daily?
it is part of the show. That is what we said. And I said before that, technical difficulties might or might not be part of the show, but they hadn't been so far. And that clearly jinxed the whole thing, because now technical difficulties are once again.
Oh, so it's my fault because I brought it up. Thanks.
It is your fault because you brought it up. Look, I don't think you're wrong. I think there's a 50% chance, and I can make the argument that it's maybe a little higher than 50%. That I think there is a decent argument that the polls are maybe understating Harris's strength a little bit. Not sure about that. Not going to go out on a limb on that, but I could make the argument if you wanted it. That said, there's a chance, however big or small, it's reasonably sizable, I think, that Donald Trump will win. And I am not that worried about what happens if he loses. I think everybody prepares for the previous war, and we're reasonably well prepared for the last war, which was January 6th. And almost all the states are in control. The swing states are mostly in control of people who believe in counting votes fairly, including your home state, which, and, so I think I'm not all that worried about the situation in which Trump loses and loses closely. I'm very worried about the situation in which he wins, and I'm worried about the state of a country in which this could even be in question. And so I'm largely in agreement with you. That said, I do think there is a quantum leap difference of worry in the event of his winning than if not. And I will allow myself 2 weeks of suspending all concern about the country for a joyous bacchanalian festival in the event of his defeat.
If you had to guess, on what date would you guess we will know who the winner is? Because it won't be the day after the election.
Well, look, I mean, I would guess that if you're assessing the most likely possibility, it will be the day of or the day after the election. And, whether it's before midnight or sometime the next morning, I consider unimportant. But look, in our adult lifetimes, there have only been 2 elections where we didn't know who was going to win, who had won, or who was going to win that night or the next morning. One was 2000, which of course took a month legitimately to figure out, and the other was 2020, where we kind of knew, not that night, but certainly into the next day, where it was heading. But I don't think, I mean, ironically, the news organization that called it most quickly was Fox, and that wasn't for several days. But we knew where it was going, and Trump knew where it was going, which is why he claimed it was being stolen. So I think the most likely possibility is that we will know quickly. But I'm not sure. Why? What do you think?
I think if it comes down to a handful of votes in a handful of states, that there are going to be recounts and legal challenges, and that could drag on for some period of time. And during that period of time, there will be mischief in the form of lots of mis and disinformation.
Oh, yes,
that would be
but that's different from saying we don't know. Right? We know how FEMA is doing, even though there's lots of mischief in the form of disinformation and misinformation. People lie about things, but we know, what happened with the hurricanes. I guess I would think of not knowing is a state of, we genuinely, like, more like 2000 or the first few days after the 2020 election, where the votes really hadn't been counted in a bunch of states and it could go either way. And I think the likelihood of that is not trivial, but not overwhelming either.
So, okay, so I'll accept that. There's epistemic not knowing, And that's less likely. You and I will probably have a pretty good sense of it the next morning. There's political not knowing. And that's when, you know, pretty much the country agrees on who won. And that could be a very different story this time around.
I guess let's flesh that out a little bit. I mean, at what level is there that uncertainty, and why does it matter?
Well, for example, if it comes down to Pennsylvania, which looks possible, and it's very close in Pennsylvania, you'll have people saying that they need a recount before it's made official. And that's going to take some time. And then you're going to have the recount challenge before it's made official. And meanwhile, you're going to have a whole lot of people in the MAGA industrial base claiming that Pennsylvania was stolen and filing lawsuits to that effect, which is going to convince half the country that the election was stolen. And you're going to have a lot of Republicans in Congress doing what they did last time around, which is entertaining the possibility that the election was stolen and saying, well, we have to do another election, or I suppose they won't say that, but, you know, they'll say the things that they said. And the result of this will be to throw up a smoke screen of chaff such that you and I are saying, well, we know who won, but the country doesn't. And that could drag on for some time. Maybe it's not important. I don't know. I am just preparing myself mentally and emotionally for I believe the technical term is shitstorm.
So I think preparing yourself for a shitstorm is a very good idea. And I am certainly not excluding the possibility of a shitstorm. I think the likelihood is always better that, you know, just based on the numbers, that we know the answer to the question in a reasonably timely fashion. And more specifically, that we know who won within 24 hours of the polls closing. My only hesitation of that is, you're right, that there is an industrial effort at this scale to obscure the reality of that in the event that it is not to the liking of the industry in question, which does seem to be a right-wing media and political industry. That said, you know, I am less worried about the situation in which the side that favors counting votes accurately, which in this case includes Republicans in Georgia,
And
controls
Arizona.
all the relevant states and the federal government. And so I think the capacity for mischief is mostly a capacity for mischief in the form of, I guess, in the extreme case, political violence, but really a lot of whining is the more. And so my real concern is actually not about the fallout from a Harris victory. It's really about the possibility of a Trump victory.
And what does that look like in the immediate aftermath?
You mean during the transition period, or do you mean
Yeah, during the transition period. And I suppose with Speaker Johnson in the House, there is no chance of last minute legislation, for example, doing anything about Schedule F. I suppose nothing of that sort will happen. And we'll be hearing a lot about Trump's plans on day one. And some of those plans may be pretty shocking. But what do you expect?
Well, I expect it to be very bad. And my assumption is that it will be bad in ways that are different from whatever we anticipate. I think the giant spree of articles anticipating what the second Trump administration will be like are mostly quite silly, to be honest. if there was anything, I think I am the person who most closely anticipated what the first Trump administration would be like. And like if you look at writing about what 2017 would be like during 2016, I don't think there was anybody who got it closer to accurate than me. And I have not written one of these articles because I think the number of different levels on which it could be bad are so many and so variable that, other than to enumerate them, I'm not really sure what there is, what basis there is for saying it's going to be bad on this axis and this axis and this axis, but not this axis, and this axis. So I look at it and I say, first of all, he is crazy. And he seems to be a bit more crazy than he used to be. And he's obsessed with vengeance. And there's a lot of opportunities for vengeance if you happen to run the federal government. Number two, he hates our allies. And number three, he hates our allies. He likes our enemies. And there's a lot of mischief you can do with that. And number three, he really, really hates immigrants, and really wants to do a lot of deportations of people including people who've been here a long time. And then number four, he loves tariffs, and he wants to impose excessive tariffs, which obviously have tariffs are like any other tax if you and they tend to retard economic growth. So look, which of them is he not going to do? I don't know. Is he going to do all of them and then a bunch of other stuff? Maybe. I do think they're all quite bad, and I assume when somebody is promising to do a bunch of stuff like that, it is very foolish to rely on his non performance by way of your safety. But that's about all I'm, when I look into the crystal ball, that I'm prepared to say.
I'm a bit puzzled because I think it's, as crystal balls go, this one's pretty clear. I think he's told us what he'll do, and the people around him have told us what they'll do, and they can do it, and there's no reason not to believe them. So let's go down the checklist and tell me which one of these you have significant doubts about. Number one, Jack Smith is history.
Oh, there's no question about that. Just to be clear, John, I'm not saying I have significant doubts about any of it. I assume we're in catastrophe land because any or all of it is likely to happen. I also do, however, note that he is a blowhard who says all kinds of things that he doesn't deliver on, like that he's going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it, and that he's going to, and so my point is not that I don't think he's going to do, or that he's more bark than bite. It's that all of it's bad, and the only hope that we have is that maybe he won't deliver on some of it.
Well, if you mean you can't predict the ultimate outcomes and what Congress will interfere with or what he'll fail to deliver on. But here's the checklist of things that I think we can say with a fair degree of confidence will happen. Jack Smith will be history.
And the convicted people will be pardoned.
And many of them will be pardoned. I think, I'm not sure what happens to the trial in New York state, but I assume that goes away quite quickly. I don't know how they make it go away, but I'm guessing the Supreme Court, if nothing else, the Supreme Court would not tolerate a continuation of that proceeding.
As a functional matter, it goes away because the state of New York can't interfere with the functioning of the U.S. government. So even if it just goes away by being put on ice for 4 years, it goes away that way.
So that goes away. It looked as if Georgia had gone away anyway. So we can say all of those things.
Yes.
Further, I would guess that almost immediately an investigation will be launched, either by the then Republican Senate or the Justice Department, or both, into Jack Smith, for example, and Merrick Garland, and that will be made as demonstratively unpleasant as it possibly can be. So I'm pretty confident of that. I am quite confident they'll do Schedule F. I don't know exactly how many civil servants will be involved in that. I've heard numbers from 20,000 to 50,000, but I think we will see that happen pretty much right away. And that will change the coloration of our civil service.
And what do you imagine the consequences of a Schedule F would be in practice?
Well, I'm not an expert on Schedule F, and people who know, you know more about it than I do, and people who know more about it than I do say that in the right hands, it could be a useful reform to improve accountability, but that in the wrong hands, it will basically mean that political appointees, Trump cronies, will be appointed to up to 50,000 formerly career jobs in the government, thus dismantling one of the most important layers of restraint. That these are people who will owe their jobs to the president, and that will significantly change the complexion of decision making. Do you think that's right, by the way?
I think it is infinitely subject to abuse. Yes. The check on it, ironically, will be where you staff the federal government with. There just aren't that many Trump political loyalists in the Washington area who want, these jobs, right? And so I do think functionally there's a limit on how much purging you can do, but in a conceptual sense, you're absolutely right. And look, if you're
plus
really
people who are there currently will face different incentives when they know they can be fired any moment if they get on the wrong side of the White House.
That is by far the more important aspect of it. Now, whether Schedule F would survive judicial scrutiny is an interesting question. I think it probably would under this court, but I do think there would be a lot of litigation over Schedule F.
We'll
there
come
would
back
not
to
be
that.
a lot of.
I have a view on the litigation surrounding Schedule F and other things, so we'll come back to that in a minute. But let's continue with the checklist of things that strike me as so probable that we should assume them. Money for Ukraine dries up.
Yeah, I think that's certain. I think the Ukrainians are the biggest short-term losers in a Trump January. And I think the signal that this is going to happen would be sent the night of the vote counting, and the need for contingency plans. I mean, he's obviously wrong that he can resolve this in 24 hours, but he's not wrong that he can send a signal within 24 hours that we're pulling the rug out from under the Ukrainians, and that will have immediate reverberations in the war, because there is absolutely nobody who can keep Ukraine supplied other than us.
Okay, so that's the list of things that I am quite confident of. So now let's go to list B.
Wait, can I add some?
Oh yeah, okay.
Some things that are you didn't mention, but I think are at least as certain as those things, and much
Okay.
more certain than, say, Schedule F.
Yes, please.
Which is sort of the installation of a cabinet that is completely different from anything we have ever seen before, and including, I mean, one of the questions is who would be the Attorney General, and I think you have to start with the assumption that the Attorney General, it obviously won't be Giuliani because he's been disbarred, but the list of people who are going to be acceptable to Trump and who are going to be willing to serve under these circumstances, it's a very refined list, and a completely terrifying list. And I think you can say the same about, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. It's the return of the Kash Patels and the Rick Grinnells, to whom we will have to be sending a lot of pictures of our feet. And you're talking about a group of people that are uh, dramatically less qualified, as well as dramatically more, I'm not sure what the polite word for psychopathic is, and walking into a circumstance of genuine, crisis in Ukraine, crisis in the Middle East, um, and so I think that's a pretty scary addition. I have a couple more, but let's let Richard Wattenberger ask his question.
There we go. Hi, hello. So I have kind of a two and a half part question. First of all, I'm wondering if you've given any thought to Trump's ability to serve out this term, and I'm thinking mainly of his deteriorating mental capabilities, and whether the 25th Amendment would be actually invoked successfully in that case, and if that were to happen, what you think about what you would anticipate about a Vance presidency. And then my second question, which you might want to answer first, is: do you have a strategy for maintaining your stress level at an acceptable level on election night? Because I don't.
Okay, well, we will address both of these questions, but before we do, I have a question for you, because you are the only music historian and musicologist in our orbit, and so I wanted to know if you saw my Aaron Copland tribute, and whether it made you nauseous.
Yes, I did see it. Yes, it made me nauseous. In fact, I am beginning therapy for the aftermath of this today, and it's kind of the doctors have not seen anything like it. It's like the symptoms are akin. They're a psychological version of long COVID, basically. This has just done tremendous damage to me.
It never goes away, I'm afraid.
I'm afraid not.
You'll be pleased to know, Richard, that I am creating a pop music version of it, so that it won't be just the classical music buffs who are traumatized.
Well, I think, Ben, that's terrorism.
Well, I mean, I call it democracy. What is good for the elites is good for the public at large. All right, Jonathan, what are your reflections on Richard's questions?
The second question is easy, and the answer is no. If you've forgotten what the question is, that's on you. The answer to the first question, which is, does Trump survive his term? And does J.D. Vance become president? And what does that mean? Is part of the answer to the answer to the second question, that is, how do I manage my stress level? To which the answer is no, I don't manage it. But to the extent I do, the answer is by not thinking about the first question, not thinking beyond Trump. We will have so much to handle so quickly. We were only halfway through our list of the stuff that happens right away, and it was going from bad to worse. That I haven't thought through what Trump's demise and his replacement, like Vance, might look like. It's at least as likely on the track that he's going that his whatever he has that's addling him just gets worse, and no one's in a position to remove him.
Yeah, so I will just add to that. I do have a strategy for managing my stress level, although I'm not sure it'll work on election night, which is I try to never confront questions before they are ripe. It's the equivalent of judicial, dismissing cases on standing. And I try not to deal with the J.D. Vance question before it ripens through Trump's incapacity in some way. I do think we can answer your 25th Amendment question, which is that the cabinet in a first-term Trump never seriously considered the 25th Amendment, and those were the so-called grown-ups in the room, the adults in the room. These will be the clinically insane teenagers. They're not going to do the 25th Amendment. They're not going to think about it. And the fact that we, by the way, know exactly who he is when we elect him, if we are electing him, suggests that they would be right not to. This is exactly, if he gets in, it would be exactly what the people voted for. And they voted for it knowing that he went on rampages about Hannibal Lecter and Gettysburg and, all that stuff. And
plus, a further backstop to that is they'll be afraid of him. A lot of people will be afraid of him. He will have vast powers to investigate, to prosecute, to use the three-letter agencies, the regulatory agencies, to wage vendettas against media organizations, to file lawsuits. If he wins the election, he'll have the support of at least one House of Congress, which will be able to do the same thing. He will be in a position to terrorize his political enemies.
I think that's exactly right. And he won't. And so I don't think thinking about, the structural constraints that are theoretically there will be the right way to think about it. The right way to think about it is, how many people can you turn out in the streets? I will note that a group of trans kids in England the other day released 6,000 crickets at a conference of people that they considered to be TERFs, and that shut the whole thing down. I kind of like, leaving aside the merits of this protest or the other, I like releasing crickets as a form. Crickets are really loud if there are enough of them. And so I made a mental note of that. I will also point out that one group of people or group of technical equipment that are not afraid of Donald Trump are Lord and Lady Laser, who have been thinking about what might be appropriate things for them to project on other than Russian diplomatic facilities. And they've made note that Smithsonian buildings often don't have a lot of windows. So, look, but this thing's going to be argued about in a lot of different forums. And I don't think Trump's cabinet is going to be the really appealing one for sanity. So, Jonathan, I want to raise some other immediate issues.
Okay, I do have a question for you on this past subject. Are you changing
Yeah.
the subject or continuing the
No, no,
subject?
no. I was going back to your
The list.
list.
Okay. Well, I'll just float the question that I actually do want an answer to before the hour's out, but it's probably a quick question, which is, I believe the Attorney General nomination will be the single most potentially damaging and terrifying nomination. What can he do if he cannot get his, I don't know, Jeffrey Clark through the Senate? What can he do with an acting in that job?
Well, so it's a really interesting problem, actually, because there are things that you actually can't do without a Senate confirmed official. So I believe only a Senate confirmed official can approve FISA requests. Now, he may not care about approving FISA requests, but the national security of the United States sure does. And so having an acting attorney general with no confirmed DAG and no confirmed AAG national security division, and I can't imagine that Matt Olson will stay in a Trump administration even for a period of time. That's a real problem, actually. And it,
For who? For him or for his potential
well, for the
targets?
functioning of the US federal government on a day-to-day basis. And he may not care about that, but it's, objectively, it's a real problem.
Well, let's assume what
And
he cares about is weaponizing the Justice Department, bending it to
so
his
he
will,
can,
and establishing that
he,
quite early. Does he need Senate confirmation to do that?
no, I don't think he does. He can appoint somebody acting attorney general, and that person can more or less function as attorney general with a few important caveats like FISA. Now, one of those caveats is uh, I think, the good faith implementation of stuff by the bureaucracy. And, the Justice Department has an unusually high uh, kind of esprit de corps culture among its lawyers because, among other things, they have professional obligations to their bars, right? And so there are limits to what a lot of them will do. And you saw that in the last Trump administration. But those limits, so I don't think your average AUSA is going to be willing to do the terrible things that a Trump um, acting attorney general might want. That said, that person will have, there will be some subset who are, and there is and the others will kind of run and hide, which is what happened last time. So, how bad it will be, how quickly, um, I don't think we know. I think it was really bad last time, and it will be worse this time.
For an acting, can he pick anyone on the street, Jeffrey Clark or whoever, or does it have to be someone with certain
You can just
qualifications?
name whoever he wants. Now, there's he did that once before. That was the Matt Whitaker. Remember him?
Yeah, the toilet
Um,
guy.
and he, that didn't work out so well. And some of us were very relieved when he then named a very responsible person like Bill Barr to be the attorney general. And we
What
urged
could
his
go wrong?
confirmation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it all seemed like, it all seemed like, uh, you know, um, like we had really dodged a bullet there. And it turned out that the difference between Matt Whitaker and Bill Barr was that Bill Barr, being smart, was much more capable of the corruption that they shared than Matt Whitaker was being something of an idiot.
Well, and to repeat the point I made a moment ago, I think something we know from Poland and Hungary and other places, do not underestimate the power of fear to influence behavior. Even among good people who mean well. There aren't that many people who want to withstand having MAGA protesters in their front yard, or having death threats, or the notion of having to spend millions of dollars on attorneys' fees, or deal with subpoenas from the Justice Department, or just be generally threatened on Twitter by the president. And of course, you know people very well who've been through this. That will change behavior. Okay, so the early thing before the musicologist came is I was just going to say there's a second. I think we've been through the things that he can and predictably will do right away, and they're very, very bad.
Well, there's one other that we haven't talked about that I just want to throw out there, which is it's not just Ukraine that's toast. It's NATO and South Korea and Japan are all
hang on.
toast.
So that's my second circle. So I think there's a second circle. There's a B list that he can't get to right away and might never get to if he gets distracted or hung up on other things.
No.
I think those things are on that list, as is the immigration roundup, because that's going to take time and a lot of logistics, and it's hard to do.
No, I totally disagree with you about this. The destruction of NATO will happen the day that he is elected. It doesn't even require that he be president, because NATO is like any confidence scheme, relies on, it has very little substantive content. The substantive content in NATO is the belief that the United States will stand behind Europe. Nobody will believe that after what John Bolton has said about Trump, after the way he behaved last time, after his criticism of the support for Ukraine, after the way he talks about the allies over the last few years. The moment he is elected again, the contingency planning will start, and he would have to do a hell of a job restoring confidence in his belief in NATO in order for it not to fall apart. And I think he will not do that work because he, in fact, doesn't want to. I also think he has, on the immigration stuff, I think he has put an enormous amount of the prestige that he has, insofar as you can call what he has prestige, in the idea that there is going to be an immediate day one or day two or three rollback of the place of migrants in our society that he will call mass deportation. How mass it will be, I don't know. But I think he's got to do it. And I think there's very little that he actually believes in. But throwing immigrants out of the country is one of them.
Well, you convinced me on NATO. I was thinking, there's going to have to be consultations and there's going to be sand in the gears. But you're right, in terms of the confidence in NATO, that's gone on election, the day he's announced as president. Okay, so that's right. On immigration, there will be stuff. But, that's such a complicated, hard thing to do. Deporting 12 million immigrants takes a logistical effort for which there is no existing capacity. And
right, but deporting 500,000 doesn't.
So there will be action on immigration. I'm just not yet sure that it will be crazy, bizarre action as opposed to some action. And then there's, oh man, it was on the tip of my tongue. The other thing trade. So I'm not sure how much he can do with the stroke of a pen on trade, but my impression is that there too, that will take some time and he will meet some obstacles in the form of economic reality. And what's more likely to happen than just a 20% increase in tariffs is that he starts bargaining and he starts saying to various people and interest groups, okay, So what will you give me not to do this to you? So I believe that that will be the Orban approach to trade. And that will play out with different industries getting different treatment depending on how nice they are to have.
Well, that's interesting. And is that a good thing if that's what happens?
Oh, I've already jumped out a 11th-story window by then, so it's all
Okay.
bad. It's all bad. No, I think the urbanization of the United States government is very possible and very probable, and I'm not counting on backstops. All of the backstops, and there were quite a few, that the founders provided us to prevent us reaching the point at which he is sworn in on January 20th, 2025, have failed. All of them. Every last one of them. And that means that I assume that there are no more backstops and that Orban happens here. And that's the plan. They're telling us that's the plan. It can be the plan. There's no reason it shouldn't be the plan. And let's just talk for a minute, since we have 9 of them, about court orders, which is where my friends are, putting their money. Well, the courts won't let them do it. I don't think second-term Trump cares a fig about court orders. And I think in a confrontation with the president, where the president says, you and what army, and simply orders his people not to do what the Supreme Court tells them to do, I think the Supreme Court backs down because it understands that its prestige disappears if it cannot impose its will. And it can't.
So I think that's a complicated question for 8 minutes and 15 seconds.
You can do it.
I would just say, the Supreme Court or lesser courts, realistically it would be a district court, can hold subsidiary officials in contempt in fashions that are, quite damaging to them and different from, I think that's a confrontation that I'm not saying he wouldn't do it or he couldn't do it. I am saying that there are some real tools on the other side of that battle that we have not seen tested, at least since the 1830s.
The only real barrier I see is the bar licenses, because he won't enforce a contempt order.
Well, but so hang on. The defiance of a court order is a felony, and I can be prosecuted as a contempt, as Steve Bannon found out, right? And they do have to worry about what happens in the next administration. In addition, their bar licenses are at issue, or so. I do think the list of tools, when you count the guns here, the presidency has a lot of them, particularly in the short term. But in the longer term, it's not clear that you want to be the staff member who because it's not like Donald Trump's going to take care of you after he leaves office. And so I think that one's a little bit complicated to me, but I'm certainly not saying you're wrong. I want to ask you a different question, though, which is, all right, we've spent 53 minutes and 42 seconds so far discussing what happens day 1, day 5, first 100 days. But I just want to understand what's happening now, which is why this is close, given that all of this is quite on the table. And I want to throw 3 possibilities at you and see which one you think is the most likely to be accurate. The first is, in fact, the race is less close than it looks, that she's going to win, and it's not actually going to be that close. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. But second possibility, there is something significantly defective about her that I don't see, because she looks like a quite attractive mainstream Democrat to me, who's clearly qualified, who's, performed well, blah, blah, blah. And I don't see the problem with voting for her. Neither does Liz Cheney, so it's like, I don't feel eccentric about that. Neither does Dick Cheney. Um, and the third possibility is that the percentage of our countrymen who are actually fascists is approaching 50%. And I find that a very hard idea to get my head around. But I'm curious what you look at this situation and and what's your working hypothesis about what's going on?
Well, I'm in the same boat you are, asking the same question, which is, I used to think I understood something about American politics. I don't anymore. I'm not even sure who the candidates are matters all that much. My working theory of this election had been that whichever party nominated someone who was not in their almost 80s and named Trump or Biden would win going away. That's obviously not, well, it's apparently not the case. So hypothesis number one, I think, is out. I think it's actually close. It's not just an appearance of closeness. Hypothesis number three is that half of Americans are fascist. I think it's more like 20 to 20.
Or at least tolerant of fascism. At least
Yeah,
prefer
that's what we mean,
fascism
right?
over mainstream Democrats.
Yeah, and by fascism, we don't mean Hitler-style goose-stepping militarists, but we mean something far-right, populist, authoritarian. And I think documentably 20 to 25% of the American public is that and always has been. And we know that from George Wallace's campaigns, which got about 25%, according to the polls. He ultimately got less because of the way our electoral system works. But he ran in much the same way that MAGA runs. Same with Patrick Buchanan. So there has always been a base for that. And then you've got another 25% who are poorly informed or just terrified of trans wokeness or just as an identity matter, they can't ever imagine voting for a Democrat. Or everyone in their community, because, they're white evangelicals in certain places and they die before voting for Democrats. So you've got those people who are fellow travelers. So that's happening. The existential apocalyptic part of all this for me is my shaken, if not shattered, confidence in the decency of half of the electorate. Every possible explanation has been given. Every possible alternative has been offered. All have been rejected. There is nothing left on the shelf to explain or to excuse. So that means we are stuck with the very dark notion that America is not the country that we thought it was. Now, there is a third type of explanation, which also makes some sense. And the 1 minute of version of that is calcification. That the two parties have become so entrenched as identity matters that it's just extremely hard not to have the same election again and again. This is despite the enormous change in the structure of the Republican Party and the external circumstances. This will be basically the third time we've run the same presidential election, same stakes, more or less same outcome. That's weird. And that suggests that politics is not like it was when we were young, when, you'd say, well, Reagan had a good debate night and the late deciders came out for him and Reagan won all those states. It's not going to be like that. It may just be that we are stuck in this calcified politics. And every time the Democrats pick up a white college-educated suburbanite, the Republicans pick up a working-class African-American. Forever.
Well, that is a very cheerful note on which to end, Jonathan Rauch.
I warned you.
Yeah, no. It's we promised to stare into the abyss, and we have stared into the abyss. We will be back tomorrow at 5 o'clock with Jordan Ellenberg, my childhood friend, who is a math professor at the University of Wisconsin, does all kinds of interesting mathy things, and fascinating guy. A lot of you have read his books, How Not to Be Wrong and Shape and that sort of thing. That'll be tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Jonathan, I prescribe alcohol. And if that's not strong enough, heroin, which is very useful for election night as well. We're going to leave it there. Remember, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have heroin. See you later.